Today on the Self Smarter podcast.
It was one of those things that it was so easy for us to immediately begin to apply. And I know that's the case for our company. And then we've also shared this with other leaders and shared this with other colleagues. And they too have found the same way with this particular teaching around the ideal team player, because it's not something that you don't already know. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really love about the book is the way he tees it up. Hi, we're Danelle and Megan, the hosts of this conversation-centric podcast for leaders seeking to be better every day. Whether you choose to be a leader in the workplace, at home, or in your community, we believe the most effective leaders are equipped to not only be self-starters, but self-smarter.
Good afternoon.
Hi there.
Hello. I'm so happy about today because our topic is one that I think is going to be very helpful for people. Uh-huh. We have read a book. We read a book years ago called The Ideal Team Player by one of our favorite authors, Patrick Lencioni, who you have mentioned multiple times.
Already in our episodes, yeah.
In our episodes, yes. So you've heard that name before for a reason. Very impactful in our business journey. And we've really put this book to work. So we think it's important for folks to hear about how we've done that. And then the hope is that they can explore whether or not it's a good book for them too. So, but before we get going,
yes,
I just have to comment. First of all, that's a beautiful color on you. She's wearing a blue jewel tone, sort of sapphire color today. It looks really nice. You just seem generally relaxed. Are you feeling good?
Yeah, feeling really good.
Okay.
If you listened last week, I mean, the big announcement of you becoming president of DMA, so you're running the day-to-day operations, so I'm feeling really good about that. Mackie, my daughter's in her last few months of college, and she's really
in the home stretch
and doing incredibly well. Yes. And I have a birthday coming up, and I'm headed to Europe, so what I'm trying to do is start to shed some of my American angst. Trying to learn to relax like a European a little bit.
Can you explain that? Because there's going to be backlash on that.
Why?
Trying to shed my Americanism.
I didn't say Americanism.
Isms.
No, like my American angst. Like we are always on the go. Like we are running and
there's a slower pace.
There's a slower pace in Europe.
Yes.
And yes, I would never shed anything about
I know you wouldn't.
Right.
That's
I'm very proud of American.
Clarify.
Yes, but no, just I'm trying to learn to relax a little bit at this stage and chapter of my life. So maybe that's what you're picking up on.
I am. I'm liking it. It's going to set a nice mood for a peacemaker during this interview.
Good.
So I'm excited. Thank you. If you are returning to the podcast or if this is your first time, I think it's only fair that we introduce ourselves. My name is Megan, and this is my co-host, Danelle.
Hello.
And we are business leaders seeking to be self-smarter and better every day. So we're so glad you're here. Let's dive into Ideal Team Player.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit more about Patrick Lencioni and this book.
Okay. So Patrick Lencioni has written a lot of books. I mean, I would say close to between 10 and 15, and maybe there are more that I'm not aware of. But we have been following him. Wow, I think we started following him when you read the book, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, which really put his teachings on the map. That was the book where I think he really started to get notoriety for what he was sharing with the world. And then we started to follow him through our listening to the Entree Leadership podcast. He's on there regularly, and then he's also a guest in their leadership conferences, which we've attended numerous times. So we've seen him speak live. And then I would say it was probably about 2016, so maybe 5 or 6 years ago, he came out with his latest book at the time, which was The Ideal Team Player, which obviously caught our attention. But what really caught our attention is the way he explains why this is important. So it was something that when I think about the things we study, it was one of those things that it was so easy for us to immediately begin to apply. And I know that's the case for our company. And then we've also shared this with other leaders and shared this with other colleagues, and they too have found the same way with this particular teaching around the ideal team player, because it's not something that you don't already know. Mm-hmm. And that's what I really love about the book, is the way he tees it up. And just so that you know, if you aren't familiar with any of his teaching, he is very big on creating fables or stories that either precede or proceed whatever he's teaching. And so he uses fables, which for someone like me who loves visual learning, I also love to learn through stories and anecdotes. So he tees up the virtues, which we'll go over in just a second, in this particular book with a fable. So, and the other thing that I really, really love about his books is that they're super thin. Yes, you can read them, easy to read. So if you think about a fable taking up half the book, then the part that you actually need to read to learn is very simple to get through. And so I do appreciate the way he makes, he creates a simplicity around some things that a lot of us struggle with, because we don't have the language to really understand it at a level to where we can make a difference in our companies. And so, and in this instance, the ideal team player can apply again to any team or group that you might be involved with. So that's another important thing to point out here. So.
Yeah, and the book really defines the model team player as a person who embodies these virtues. And you're going to talk more about the virtues, but it is humility, hunger, and drive, essentially. Right. Those are the three virtues. And it really doesn't matter in any scenario. I mean, if you think about it, in any scenario, in a home, in a business, in a cultural group, whatever, there's always someone you can start to identify. Oh, that's someone's humble. Oh, that person's really hungry. Oh, that person really knows how to handle this, and I don't.
Yes.
And that's why it's been so transformational for our business, is because it just put us in a seat to be even more aware in three buckets.
Yes.
Those three virtues.
Right.
So, in terms of our business as well, it's a recruitment tool.
Yes.
So would you say, I'd like for you to expand a little bit on how it's become a tool for our company.
Okay. So as you mentioned, the ideal team player is a combination of someone who is hungry, humble, and smart. And we'll break that down in a moment. But the way we've used it from a development standpoint is that we first, when we came across the ideal team player, we were on the journey. And so the journey that we talked about in episodes 1, 2, and 3 of realizing that we had a leadership issue, or I had a leadership issue, then realizing that the culture, what culture was and what it wasn't. And then episode 3, where we talk about how we've been and continue to remodel our own. So at the time we came across the ideal team player, when it was published, we had already realized that we had a hiring issue. And again, I won't regurgitate that, but we needed to get better at hiring. And this immediately helped us to basically interview in a smarter way. We started to look for traits of humility and hunger and smart, which again, we'll talk about how he defines those particular virtues. So from that aspect, that's where we started. We really started to use hungry, humble, smart, the ideal team player, in recruiting and interviewing candidates at the company. Then what we started to do as we developed in most organizations, they're called performance reviews, or how we were going to evaluate people's progress. I was always turned off by performance reviews, and we tried a number of different ones, and we have some doozies, and were not successful, especially when we tried to put a numerical rating around performance. That did not work in our culture at all. And so that was, that did not go over very well. And so what we started to do as we were developing, again, we don't have performance reviews, but what we do have is, if you're a specialist, which is more of the entry level, and it could lead up to almost 2 years of experience at the company. Some folks come into the organization having work experience, and some are coming right out of college. We have what's called progress plans. And so they receive a progress plan every quarter. I mean, we're very aggressive with it. And then in the progress plans, we talk about the three virtues, and they rate themselves, and we give them feedback on they're in this particular stage of their development where they are on hungry, humble, and smart. And we're able to give examples, and they are also able to bring that to the table as well. And because it's very easy to identify it once you start practicing and understand more about the virtues. So, and then the other areas other roles in our company, managers and directors, we have what's called development plans, and they are taking a more detailed assessment of hungry, humble, and smart, which we'll share all of that, links to that information in the show notes so that you know what we're using. We've adapted it a little bit for DMA to where the language reads more like our organization, and we've probably added some elements to it. But I love it because the assessment is something that you easily score yourself on or have someone else score yourself on, and you are able to see where you have some potential work to do in a particular area. So that's how we've incorporated it, and now it is just a part of how we show up. We use those virtues to be the best version of ourselves, and obviously we use other things. I mean, the episode before this is the Enneagram, but that's more of how we're wired.
Yes.
When it comes to the virtues, it's something that it's almost an awareness.
Yeah.
And so we call them here, he calls them virtues, we call them key characteristics. Like if you have to be able to show up with all three of these. That doesn't mean that you're always working on one of them, especially as you're developing.
That's right.
I mean, you can be extremely humble at one stage of your career, and then all of a sudden you go into a leadership role or you take on a different responsibility or a particular client. It's easy to lose sight sometimes of your humility. And so that's just an example. But yeah, that's how we use it in our organization.
It's really, it's been so interesting because it puts the person that's going through the development plan, like they're the ones that are driving it. So let's say I go to all the development plans in my role here at DMA. And so I listen to everybody come to the table with their assessment, which, by the way, the assessment is in the book. It's at the very end of the book.
It's also online, so we'll send a link.
And they're online. But they come with that assessment, and they come with their own self-evaluation. And then it's during that development plan. So I'm not telling somebody where they are, hungry, humble, and smart.
Right.
They're telling us, and we're agreeing or disagreeing or guiding or coaching in that moment. Yes, and we've seen this in a good way, in an opportunistic way. So it's really been a very, very good tool. And because most people are not ever constantly equalized across hungry, humble, and smart, you're going to have times, like you said, where I'm more hungry than I am humble, and so on and so forth. I've got, I'm height in one area and I've got a deficiency in another. That's for us as coaches to help hold each other accountable. So would you say that the balance is sort of tricky? There's kind of always this balance going on with the ideal team player and managing that for ourselves.
I don't know if it's tricky, but it's more of, like I said, it's more of an awareness. And so it's interesting when we decided to adopt this, not beyond the hiring process, and really adopt it in the organization. I'm sure you remember this, but I had the entire company take the assessment on me.
Yes.
And so then I had the assessments, and then I came up with an average score. And it was interesting to find out, the particular areas where I had work to do. And, a lot of it centered around the way I was sharing information and the way I was listening. I think if I remember the two, overall, I had a decent score, but I remember taking the assessment myself, and I scored myself less in more areas than the team, because I think this was probably 3 years ago. So I was already well on my journey of
self-smarter.
Yeah, I was definitely already on my journey, but it was good to see what I thought I needed to work on, and then the people that I was leading every single day, what they had a slightly different opinion. It wasn't so polarizing. It was a surprise, but it was just so helpful to me as a leader. So what I would tell you is that if you are leading a person or a group of people, again, that may be on your sports team, that might be in your community, whatever you're involved with. And certainly, in organizations, that it's a good exercise to take it yourself and then maybe have a peer, a colleague, take the assessment with you in mind. That's the way it's teed up. And then eventually have your team take it with you in mind. And because it really does start with us. And once I was able to take the assessment and share that information with the company, I think people got a lot more comfortable with the notion of, okay, we're going to operationalize Hungry, Humble, Smart as something that we're not going to not be talking about a lot. So I need to lean into this in order to progress, quite frankly, at this company.
And I think it's something that people enjoy.
Oh gosh, it's great.
They enjoy it. I mean,
it's so straightforward, and it gives you a lot of, good insight that you can put to use immediately.
Right.
Immediately. We see it around here all the time.
Right. It's really turned flip the script, as you say, on looking forward to development meetings and progress plan meetings versus being so fearful that it's paralyzing.
Correct.
We don't have those. So they're always very open and honest. And that's the trick. That's the trick with this is if you're going to institute everyone rating you on this test, you have to have an open heart and an open mind to be ready to receive what you receive. Yes. And then be ready to execute differently. And so by you doing that, you set the pace and you set the tone for how this was going to be executed throughout the business. And now it is just part of our DNA. So really, I think it's important that we get into some of the definitions of the virtues, or just talk a little bit about those individually. And so Hungry, Humble, and Smart are what?
So again, the way he describes them, it's easy to look at those words and go, I know exactly what that means, or I know exactly what those virtues, how they can be described. But he, the way he tees it up was really enlightening for us. And he says, relative to humility or humble, he says, great team players focus on the success of the team rather than personal interest. They lack overbearing egos or obsession with status. They don't try to get attention and readily give credit to others. So that part of humility, I mean, that makes sense, right? Like that's probably a definition that we could all buy into. Where we learn the most about humility is when he talks about that there's two kinds of not humble people. And he says that they seem like they have a lot in common, but they're very different in the way they show up. But the thing that they have in common is that it's insecurity. Yeah. And so he says arrogant, ego-driven people who try to make themselves the center of attention, that's one type of humility. And we all know those people. Yep. They're less confident than they try to appear. They try to overcompensate with words and what they know. And quite honestly, they undermine teamwork by stirring resentment and creating division among the team. And so again, I think the key word is arrogant and ego-driven. And I think that's the most common of the non-humble people that are really easy to recognize.
Yes. In fact, questions that we ask when recruiting to identify arrogance are, tell us about a win that you experienced in your work over the last 6 months. And they will share a win. And then we'll probe a little bit further and we'll say, now, was this something that you achieved alone or was this something that you were able to work in a group with? And just by asking simple questions like that, you will get answers that vary from, oh no, I had a whole team of people supporting this effort if it weren't for the data analysis person, if it weren't for this person, versus, oh no, I did it all by myself.
And we've had that answer.
We have. and that's a red flag.
For humility, yes.
For humility, that's an example of, okay, that was a little different. We would probe further, ask a different question.
Tell me more about that.
That's exactly right. Looking for other cues that maybe we're humble in some ways, and then in other ways, we really do things by ourselves and like kill it, right? So that's an example of arrogance that I think is applicable to the business.
And the other less common version of non-humble people are people that downplay their contributions and abilities. And so they can seem humble, but really it's self-effacing. So an example of this type of lack of humility is someone who receives a compliment, for instance. So if I pay you a compliment and then you immediately like, oh no, that really wasn't that good. So if I tell you did a great job on something and then you spend the next 10 minutes telling me why it wasn't, that is a really easy surface level example of the reverse of the arrogant kind of humility. And so but it's equally, it's a problem if it goes unchecked.
Oh yeah.
And, we have identified it in our company a number of times, or people actually have identified it about themselves and said, no, I need to accept that compliment more, or I need to, speak up when I was the one who brought that project to a close and accept the applause for that. And so it's a development process of realizing that. And I think, again, depending on how you're wired, it's easy to show up with the lack of humility in any one of these buckets. But I think it really does come down to being aware of what humility is in this instance as it relates to being an ideal team player that will help you stay in check in this particular area.
That's right. And he says, Patrick Lencioni says, people who are, because the question then begs, then what is ideal from a humility perspective? And he says,
well, I mean, I think the ideal is that you are neither overrate or underrate yourself.
That's right.
So he says humility is somewhere, don't go too far either way. Don't
kind of in between.
Don't overdo it, but definitely don't underdo it. He says, and he gives beautiful detail on someone who underplays their humility and how dangerous that can be.
That's right.
And it can be just as disruptive to a team as the outward arrogant folks.
That's right.
So,
yep. Okay, tell us a little bit about hungry.
I think hungry is the most straightforward of the three virtues in the book. And people are hungry; they're driven to seek more work and responsibility. They're always looking ahead to the next step and opportunity, and they're committed to the work and willing to go above and beyond, working outside of regular hours. And, I talked in a previous episode about when we started to brainstorm this podcast, and I set the company on a course that we were going to finally do this. And I talked about how Jordan came marching, Jordan, who's producing the podcast now for us, come marching in my office and said, I want that. In that moment, I could see hunger and smart. We'll talk about smart in a second, but in that moment, I could see it. And she was that perfect balance of using humility. She wasn't being arrogant about it. She was raising her hand and saying, I'm confident in my abilities to figure out how to do this. She's never produced a podcast, and nor has anyone at this company. But that is a perfect example of hunger. And again,
we weren't begging for a producer at that point.
No. And she owned it. So I think that's a perfect example of hungry. And I think a key aspect of hunger is that if someone's truly in a healthy space relative to their hunger in the work, you're not having to push them very much.
Right.
They know how to do it. And again, I think there's an unhealthy version of that too. Around this place, we're sometimes having to reel people back in from the too much side of hunger versus the too little. But that's just where we are as a company. But believe me, we've had plenty of chapters where we were having to pull people into the realm of hunger, but that's just not the case in our company right now. And so I would say overall we have a very healthy balance because we care deeply about monitoring that particular aspect of our business. We don't want to burn people out, but at times when there's an opportunity, you're not going to stop someone from leaning in. In this case, I mean, look at us. We're on episode 7?
Right.
Wow.
I know.
So anyway, kudos to Jordan.
We've had a healthy amount of hunger.
Yep.
Around how we wanted it to be produced and how we wanted it to be displayed and shared with all of you. So hungry, this absolutely true. This podcast is a result of hungry. I would say, just to connect the two, hungry and humility, hungry and humble, it's almost a nice combination of that would be, or visual is no strings attached effort.
Yes.
no strings attached effort, which equals results.
Correct.
Because the person who's doing it is doing it for themselves and for the greater good of something. And a group, for the world, whatever they're doing, the planet, but they're doing it because they know it's the right thing to do.
Right.
Right. So no strings attached. I think that's a nice way of putting that. All right. And then SMART is the tricky one.
It is, because at face value, you're thinking IQ or literally how smart someone is relative to, relative to their intelligence.
That's right.
And in the context of the ideal team player, he refers to intelligence, yes, but also someone who has common sense when it comes to dealing with people.
Yeah.
That's key. So those people skills, understand people with SMART in this context, they understand where others are coming from. They ask questions, they listen intently, they're aware of the group dynamics and the impact of their own words and actions, and they act appropriately for the particular circumstance. That's how people show up smart in the construct of the ideal team player. So when we read that, it was so eye-opening. And we talked about it in episode 6 when we talked about really the value of the Enneagram. The Enneagram helps us become more emotionally intelligent people and really move our development in that direction. That is where SMART comes in, being able to, in a moment, I think it would be safe to say, I loved your example previously, but be able to read a room, be able to understand when an opportunity exists and when an opportunity doesn't exist, to speak up and speak your mind, and doing it in a way where people want to listen to you versus, the opposite. So I think SMART was, when we started to really study these virtues, that was the one that we were like, okay, that was actually, this ideal team player came to us before the Enneagram. They were really close. Yes. I would say Enneagram was just after this, but putting all of those pieces together at the same time, I look back and I can reflect. I didn't probably realize it at the time, but looking back, it was like, okay, that really started to elevate this kind of SMART in our organization.
That's exactly right.
Know you and know me.
That's right.
And we get the best version, the best outcome for both of us.
That's right. Read the room. That's the simplest way to put it. And I remember when we first initiated it, or the ideal team player in this line of thinking, that SMART, to me, organizationally, that was the area that I think we saw as our biggest challenge.
Absolutely.
Our biggest opportunity for growth and development, which is why there was then Enneagram, then there's all these other moves that we've been making over these years to ensure that people have the tools and we have the strength and courage to tell them the truth and to get real about these things so that we could advance together as a group.
Yes.
So it's SMART is not an easy, people are born hungry, I think, potentially. Yeah. Or they go through life and they have reasons to get them to a point where they're hungry.
Listen, everybody's hungry about something and what they care about.
Yeah.
And so, but some people definitely know how to utilize that virtue to their benefit more than others.
Yes. Humble. You're born, or you grow up and you decide, I'm an extrovert, I'm an introvert. You have shy flowers. That looks like humble and what we've been taught. So learning more about what humble could look like, that was easy to understand and apply. SMART is definitely the hardest one.
Yeah, I don't, it's hard in the sense that we're turning SMART on its ear.
Yes.
We're now saying, in order to be an ideal team player here, we care more about you being smart about what you know about yourself and what you know about others versus necessarily your aptitude or IQ. And so I think that for us was, again, gate opening up to a different way of thinking. He gave us the words, and the teachings from the book really helped us to say, okay, that is what we value at this company. And so that's how we adopted these as the key characteristics for someone who's part of this team.
So we use it when we recruit. We do it, if people apply for a job here at our company, they go through multiple rounds of interviews and with different people. And each one of those people who are interviewing that person know the virtues inside and out. So they're looking for those indicators to show strength or weakness in any given virtue. One of the things I think it'd be fun if you shared about what we kind of do whenever we're sort of wrapping the interview process. Okay. There's one last step that we take that's very different than what most companies probably do.
Okay.
Which is we go out into public.
Yes. And that was literally born from us realizing that because we care so much about being an organization that is about the people. Yes, we're about marketing, and yes, we're about our purpose of our marketing doing greatness in the world through the avenue of access and demand for fresh food. And so once we realized that, okay, the way they're showing up in an interview, and Dave Ramsey taught us any old donkey can show up like a thoroughbred for interviews over and over again, because what is an interview? It's a performance. And so what we realized is that if we just went and had us put people in a social setting, they could show up in an interview showing pretty good marks on all the three virtues, and then you get them in a social setting and they either flourish,
right,
or then we can see that there might be indicators of someone who might not be struggling, who could be struggling with humility. For instance, if they treat a server in a way that we would never dream of, and again, it's that's a kind of a lame example, but it is one because we've had that happen, unfortunately.
Yeah.
But that really started to help us identify that was a logical last step in what was becoming and in what is today an arduous process of hiring people. I mean, it's not the easiest thing in the world to make it through, to become part of our team. And that's to protect that person from being unhappy here. That's As right. I've said before, I don't want to own a company. And now you literally lead a company where people are unhappy. So I want it for them. And I also want it for the people that do want to be here and that are bought into our culture and that care about protecting it. And I think where this also comes into play, and one of the biggest things we've learned from the book, and again, it's so worth your time and effort to at least take a look at it so that you can see if it works for your organization. But he goes into great detail to discuss what happens when you have two of the virtues and one is in a deficit.
Right.
And it's very helpful to understand, and he puts descriptions around those particular people. So if you are only hungry and you don't possess a lot of humility or smart, you're a steamroller, I think is what he would call it. But he does talk about the importance of when you should really put up your red flags or stop signs with someone is when they only possess one of the virtues and they're completely deficit or lacking in two of the others. But he said it's typical for us to have strengths, people who are ideal team players, to be performing well in two of the virtues and definitely having one of the virtues to work on. But the way he describes that relationship between the three, hungry, humble, and smart, was really helpful to us as well, because one of them's the politician, which I can easily fall into that category because I'm very hungry. We talked about the fact that I was a self-starter. I didn't become a great leader until I became self-smarter. And then, so I've had hunger. That's not something I've lacked, but then, also smart, people smart, that piece of it, I had it from this, almost the street standpoint.
Yeah.
And I possessed that version of it, and so I could easily be he characterizes as the politician, because I can often, at times in my life, quite frankly, and career, I've lacked humility. And and it didn't come from a place of me thinking I was better than anyone else, but I struggled listening. I struggled, not necessarily, I've been decent about giving people credit, but I could do it in a way where it could be perceived as being more self-serving versus being about another person. So I had to learn all of those things. And once again, it's just about awareness. And it's so easy to look at his teachings and go, oh, I've totally.
Yes.
And so I would say that, I don't know how I got off on this rabbit trail. I just wanted to make sure that our listeners understand that there is a dynamic between the three virtues. And there's a lot of great lessons there that I think really help amplify the understanding and, most importantly, the application.
Absolutely. And guaranteed, if this is something that interests a leader that's listening, I can just tell you from what Danelle is saying, she's absolutely right. You will be able to identify very quickly who you have on your team in terms of the steamroller, the bashful flower. I can't remember exactly what the vernacular was that he used to describe those different types of people, but where they are heavy in one and lacking in another, and how that shows up at work. So it's just a leadership tool that is absolutely paramount, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right.
So what we're going to do is we'll have this resource and a link to our favorite version of the Ideal Team Player Assessment in the show notes.
And I also want to make sure that we put in there some podcasts and some, definitely to his he has a newish. He launched a podcast during COVID. I love it. And I think he and his team at his company is called The Table Group. It's an easy listen. It's about other things other than the Ideal Team Player, but we'll put some links in there from his podcast as well as Entre Leadership and maybe some content that he has out on YouTube just to help you get acquainted with the teaching. And then you'll love, I can't wait to, his style is, again, high energy and he definitely keeps you awake.
He's been a huge consultant at Southwest Airlines.
Oh,
so that's how I came to know him originally, because I have dear friends that have worked for Southwest Airlines for a long time. And my friend Summer, who's probably listening to this, told me you should read 5 Dysfunctions. And then, of course, we found Ideal Team Player through falling in love with 5 Dysfunctions and getting on that train. So,
well, we didn't fall in love with the Dysfunctions, but we definitely appreciated the book.
Appreciate the book. And his line of thinking and his approach and teachings, we just really enjoyed that. It was like entertaining, but you learned at the same time. So
absolutely,
and that's the best kind to do. So let's transition to music moment,
Yay.
Which is our favorite part of our podcast. So you've been on the live music train a lot lately. It's like 2022 and the masks are coming off out there and you're like, woo. Tell me a little bit about that.
I would say, obviously, music is a big part of my life and it affects all my moods. And, daughter's studying musical theater in New York. So performance is a big part of our world. And when COVID hit and, you're not able to see that aspect of it. And again, I'm for her, I'm glad she had the Zoom potential, but I mean, come on. And then watching some of the other performances over Zoom, again, at the beginning of it, anything was appreciated. But once I started feeling really comfortable and I made a commitment that I'm going to attend way more live performance. And I think we attend a lot of live performances, but I just made a commitment that really want to help these artists that are getting back out there. And it is just filling my soul. And so as we've mentioned, this is a big year for me, turning 50, and I'm going to celebrate it all year long and many different ways to include travel, but live music for sure. So I have a lot of tickets secured for different shows. I've already seen Little Big Town, and just recently I saw Keith Urban. And what I would say is that he started the show saying after his opening number, I mean, I'd never seen him. And actually one of my very good friends, Michelle, she's been begging me to see him for years. She's like, I can't believe you haven't seen him, because he's just an incredible artist in every sense of the word. I mean, what he can do with a guitar just blows me away. But he starts, after his opening number, he tells us that he had not performed. That was his first performance in 2 years.
Wow.
2 years. And so he talked openly and vulnerably about being nervous and just getting back into it. And it changed the concert for me. First of all, he had me from hello with what his talent and what he's able to do. And then when he shared that,
he got vulnerable.
Yeah, when he shared that, I felt for the artist, all of them, whatever their art form is, to start to really think about, especially relative to live performances, what they've been through. And that just doesn't go for the performer, but all those that support those shows. And it's easy to, if you're not in that space every day, to forget about that. And there's so many occupations where we need to have empathy for people and appreciation. In this instance, though, live performers. And so I'm fully committed to seeing as many concerts out there as I can. So if there's one you need a pal to come join you on, please let me know. I think we may be seeing Brandi Carlile an obnoxious amount of times this year. And so it's seen a lot of great artists, but hopefully Dolly will have a show or two so I can get out there and see my girl. But yeah, that's why I don't know. I mean, are you going to get on the live? Well, I'm going to drag you to a few, so
you are.
I know the answer to some.
You are.
But
yes,
you care about it too.
I
You've
do.
got a son who's
live
a performer. Yeah.
Yes. And in fact, he's not a musician, but we're going to see John Mulaney.
Okay.
So I'm really excited about that.
Right.
We love him as a family, and he really connects with my son. So we're going to do that. And then, of course, Brandi Carlile. I don't even know how many times I'm going to see her.
Well,
multiple.
There might be a few surprises up my sleeve.
Woo!
Yeah. So
I've missed the opportunity to see Casey, I think. And then Paul McCartney.
Casey
Musgraves. Yes. Okay. And then Paul McCartney on tour this year. I think that would be a huge miss if people don't see him.
The Dixie, I just saw the email this morning. The Dixie, well, they're now called the Chicks, but they're forever the Dixie Chicks to me. Yeah, Texas girl. But they are touring as well. So I mean, I think
it's just
there's going to be so much rich, again, performances
artistry
for us to go see. And what I'm seeing from all of the performances that I've been seeing in the last 6 months is just this deep appreciation from the artist and their crews. It feels different. I don't know how to explain it. And so I'd love to hear from our listeners who you're excited to see and what shows and what's coming up for you. So
use those stories on the grams, listener. Yes. Go on to the Instagram and share in your stories, tag Self Smarter, whether you're at a live music event or you're listening to something that you absolutely love. We'd love to hear what you're listening to. Music it's a motivator. It helps people focus. It certainly helps us get on level setting from an emotional standpoint with playlists. I mean, I could go on forever, but just please feel free to share. We'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely. And wait, speaking of sharing, I do want to give a shout out. We've received overwhelming input and just care for what we're trying to do here on this podcast, and we remain in awe and
grateful,
super grateful. And one of the things that can really help, and I think people are asking, how can we help you share this content that's so helpful, other than literally just texting it or emailing the episodes to a friend or telling them about it. And what we're learning about podcasting is the algorithm, much like social media, which we're very familiar with, matters. And so if you do like what we're doing here and you want others to find us, maybe people we don't know, the best thing that you can do is to leave us the show a review, a rating. Rating's easy. It's 1 through 5 stars. Yep. And then also, if you have the time and there's something particular you like about what we're doing, leave us a review. And the best place to do that is on Apple Podcasts. Yep. But you can certainly do it wherever you listen to podcasts. But Apple Podcasts would really help us to get our type of content shared with other people who want to be or care about this journey that we're all on together. So I want to give a shout out to one of our former team members she is a huge fan. So if you're following us on social at all, she's comments a lot and has been giving us just such great love. I want to call her out, Molly. She worked with us for 4 or 5 years actually, and now she owns her own business, and so proud of her. And
so proud.
We got to catch up with her and her partner recently, and they were here in Dallas, and so it was really good. And what we want to do is we want to also acknowledge that we have some cool Self Smarter swag. And you can't see this. if you aren't watching us on YouTube, but we've got a cool cleaner cloth and a really nice leather bound notebook and a cool pen. So we'd love to, basically some swag.
Yeah.
We have some other goodies that we'd be putting in a swag box. So Molly, look for that. It's coming your way. Thank you for being one of the first people to review our podcast. And I know that came from a place of you truly wanting our content to be shared with others. So thank you for that. And we welcome others to do the same if your heart so calls you to do so.
That's right.
So,
thank you so much. We'll wrap for today. Thank you,
right.
Danelle.
Thank you, Megan.
And we send you off into the week with grateful hearts.
As always, you can connect with us on Instagram and Facebook at Self Smarter Podcasts. You can also leave a rating or review if you enjoyed what you heard today. Not only does this mean so much to us, but it also helps other leaders and future leaders find our community. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us in becoming Self Smarter. This podcast is produced by Snacks Media and music is from a free platform. Well, that is until Brandy Carlisle reaches out to us to write the original score for our podcast. Friends, have a great rest of your day.